So you might have heard in the news a term called initial coin offering or ICO. So what this is actually a play on the word initial public offering or IPO. This is essentially a public way to fundraise. This allows teams to raise money for their project by selling some of their tokens. The key difference, though, is that ICOs are often done in the really early stages of funding, so oftentimes even before a product has been launched. So imagine the users being able to have stake in Twitter in the really early days. There's tons of money raised through this method. Over the past year, there's been billions of dollars raised. Telegram's ICO alone actually raised $1.7 billion. There are thousands of tokens out there, as I mentioned, and so there are many scams, and there's actually regulatory uncertainty among how these ICOs are conducted. So definitely be really careful before participating in these ICOs. So I talked about decentralized applications or dApps. So I think one of the most important dApps that we've been seeing lately is something called cryptokitties. We're steadily seeing the number of transactions per day increase on the Ethereum network, but there was a huge spike at the end of 2017, early 2018, with the onset of a decentralized application called cryptokitties. So cryptokitties is essentially this game where you can collect these online unique digital cats. And so these cats all have completely new features. You can see here they all look really different. And so people were collecting these cats. They were breeding these cats together to create completely new digital cats. They were also being able to trade these. Some of these cats were worth a lot of money. And so this may sound really silly to you, but we've seen historically that people really love collecting things. So people collect physical items all the time, like trading cards or coins or stamps or toys or cars. And so this is really just a way of collecting the digital form. And you can even think of something like collecting artwork. So people love collecting unique artwork. So just imagine if someone like Kanye West were to issue a unique digital collectible, people would really want to own something like this. And I myself was super addicted to CryptoKitties. So I was playing with this game for probably 2 weeks straight, and I spent way too much money on it. It's very addicting and it's really fun. So sometimes in new technology, you'll often see that the first things that really take off are things along gaming or toys. So Ethereum actually allows for completely new applications that we've never seen before. So I think a really great example of this is Augur. So Augur is a decentralized prediction markets platform. So prediction market is when people are allowed to bet on the likelihood of an event occurring. You can see I have an image here of Augur's beta. This, in the first prediction market, it says, will Ethereum trade at $2,000 or higher at any time before the end of 2018? And people can bet on the likelihood of this event occurring. So we've had prediction markets in the past. This isn't a completely new concept. But in the past, we've had centralized prediction markets where you had these centralized operators saying what the outcome of the event was, or they were pulling this information from external news feeds like something like Reuters. And so this was essentially their oracle, their trusted source of information. Well, Augur doesn't want to rely on these centralized oracles because the whole point is they're trying to be decentralized. So they really need something called a decentralized oracle, a decentralized source of information. The way that Augur does this is really interesting. So Augur themselves issued an ICO, and they issued a bunch of tokens, and now token holders are randomly selected to report on the outcome of prediction markets. For the first time, you have something like a decentralized oracle, and you can use this to plug this information to other decentralized applications. I also want to say that prediction markets aren't just for betting and for something that's fun. You can actually use this for insurance purposes, hedging, or even something called futarchy, which I think is really interesting. So futarchy is when elected officials use the outcome of prediction markets to help them form policy decisions. You can imagine an elected official creating a prediction market saying, will implementing this specific policy increase the GDP by X%? And so now people can vote on the likelihood of this event occurring. Now, elected officials can use the outcome of this prediction market to help them inform the decisions they make around implementing this policy. And so the idea is that people generally put their money where their mouth is. This will be higher signal for elected officials to know what policies to implement. So I've talked a lot about Ethereum, and that's just because there's a lot of developer activity on Ethereum. But know that not all applications are actually built on Ethereum. And so there are many other blockchains that people are creating. An example of this is Filecoin. Filecoin is a decentralized storage network that has its own native utility token called Filecoin. So Filecoin raised $257 million through private and public sales. They're creating a decentralized version of what we see as centralized data storage platforms, so something like Amazon. And so the way it works is you essentially have all this spare file storage on your computer. So why not rent this out and host files for someone else and get paid for this? People on Filecoin's network actually earn Filecoin for hosting files for other people. And so you can take this Filecoin and exchange it for US dollar, Bitcoin, or Ether, or some more liquid coin if you don't want to hold on to Filecoin. And so now that you have this new supply of people that have this spare file storage that are now renting out their storage, you can now compete directly with the centralized data storages. And so you can have more competition over prices. And I think that that's really comparable to something like Airbnb, where we saw all these people that had spare bedrooms that they weren't otherwise using. So now that they can rent this out, you can have really competitive prices that are competing directly with hotels. An important concept to cover is forks. A fork is when someone copies the code of an open source project and creates a new version. So know that anyone can do this because the whole point is that the project's open source. We expect forks to happen in the really early days, and the coolest thing is that it enables people to conduct multiple experiments at once. This is a really unique scenario where you now have the power in the hands of network owners who can then fork if they don't agree with the original owners. So imagine having two different versions of Facebook. So you have a community that just didn't like the features on the first Facebook, and now they're just going to fork and create a completely new version of Facebook with their own features. You can now just have these multiple experiments running in parallel, which is really fascinating. An example of a fork is a coin that's pretty popular called Litecoin. And so Litecoin is just a fork of Bitcoin. The creator, Charlie Lee, created Litecoin by just taking Bitcoin's code and copying it and changing a few parameters, like having faster transaction confirmation times, increasing the total supply, and changing the mining algorithm. There's this misconception that Bitcoin and Ethereum are anonymous. Well, that's actually not true. They're pseudonymous, which means it doesn't use the real identity. I have a screenshot here of the Bitcoin blockchain, and so you can see there aren't actual real names on the blockchain, but you see this string of numbers and letters which represent addresses. But what you can see on the blockchain is you can see transaction details like the transaction amounts, the addresses that were involved in the transaction, and the balances. And so this is not necessarily ideal because a lot of information gets revealed through this process. You might not be able to see who's doing what right now, but there's actually information that gets revealed over time. So let's say you do KYC or know your customer on an exchange that collects your information. Well, now the exchange knows what addresses are tied to your identity. There's also services like Chainalysis and Elliptic, whose sole purpose is to de-anonymize networks like Bitcoin. So they have entire teams of machine learning experts to really try to trace some of these coins and what the identity is. So privacy coins like Monero and Zcash actually aim to hide sensitive transaction details. So they think that this information shouldn't be revealed to the public, but you should allow for something called selective transparency. And so this is the idea where you can not default to showing your entire transactions for the world to see, but you can be selectively transparent by showing it to individuals or parties that you want to see. So they have this concept of a view key, which is essentially a key that allows you to access viewing transaction details. So you can share this view key with someone that you want to have see all this sensitive information. So it's really similar to not having your entire bank account history for the world to see, but you can download a bank account statement and share that selectively with certain parties. So let's say you want to comply for an audit. So with all of this, there's major technological innovations that are possible. So one interesting one is decentralized autonomous organizations or companies, also called DAOs and DACs. So these are essentially organizations that are run through rules that are encoded in smart contracts. So you can now have networks that replace entire corporations, which is fascinating. Something that's particularly relevant today with what we've been seeing with what's happening with Facebook is that you can now have people own their own identity and reputation data without having this to be in the control of centralized parties. The last thing that really excites me is that you can have users and developers experiment with entirely new governance and economic systems at a much faster rate than we've ever been able to experiment with before. So there are really a lot of major technological innovations through this. What really drew me into this space at first was this idea of digital money and financial innovation. But after having been in this space and learning a lot more, I realized that this is about so much more than just money. So I hope that you're interested in what you've heard today and that you're excited to dig deeper and learn more. Thanks so much.